At 1400 hours on January 26, 1945, Second Lieutenant Audie Murphy crouched in a shallow foxhole at the edge of the Bois de Riedvier forest in northeastern France, watching 6 German tanks and 250 infantrymen advance across the frozen field toward positions his 18 remaining men would not survive defending. Murphy commanded what remained of Company B, 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division. This was the final phase of the Colmar Pocket offensive. The Colmar Pocket was an 850 square mile area in the Vosges Mountains held by the German 19th Army. American and French forces had been trying to eliminate this pocket since November 1944. The Germans were fighting desperately. They knew if the Allies cleared the west bank of the Rhine River, the invasion of Germany itself would follow. The 3rd Infantry Division had been assigned to capture Holzwihr and the surrounding forest. This was critical terrain. The woods dominated the approaches to the German stronghold. Whoever controlled these woods controlled the roads, and whoever controlled the roads controlled the battle. The company had started 2 days earlier with 120 men. On January 24th, the 15th Regiment had been ordered to capture the heavily wooded area near Holzwihr. The previous unit had tried the same task and been torn apart by German armour and infantry. Unable to dig foxholes in the frozen earth, they suffered catastrophic casualties. Company B went in to replace them. By midnight on January 25th, Company B had pushed 600 yards into the woods. But the fighting had been savage. 102 of the company's 120 enlisted men were either killed or wounded before they even reached their assigned position. All the other officers were dead. Murphy was 19 years old. He was the only officer left. He had become company commander less than 12 hours earlier. Murphy watched the German advance through the morning mist. 6 Mark IV Panzers. 250 infantrymen in white winter camouflage. They were advancing from Holzwihr village to capture the forest and the road that cut through it. Lieutenant Colonel Keith Ware, battalion commander of 1st Battalion, 15th Regiment, had stated clearly that possession of this forest was of cardinal importance. The woods dominated the German stronghold of Holzwihr. Losing this position would threaten the entire 3rd Infantry Division's offensive. Murphy understood what was at stake. The road had to be held. But his 18 men could not stop 6 tanks and 250 infantry. Army doctrine was clear. When facing overwhelming force, preserve your unit, fall back to the next defensive line, regroup, live to fight another day. Murphy had learned this at Camp Walters in Texas during basic training. Every manual said the same thing. But falling back meant abandoning the road junction. And that meant German armour would pour through the gap and strike the regimental headquarters 1 mile to the rear. 2 full battalions were depending on Company B to hold until reinforcements arrived. Murphy had called 1st Battalion headquarters that morning for instructions. The operations officer told him reinforcements had not yet arrived. No one knew when they would come. Hold your position were his orders. Company B was alone. Murphy had positioned his 18 men in a shallow U-shape across a clearing. The forest formed natural barriers on both flanks. 2 M10 tank destroyers from the 6th 1st Tank Destroyer Battalion had arrived at dawn to provide fire support. One destroyer sat 40 yards ahead of Murphy's lines. The second positioned itself on the dirt road behind the American position. Murphy set up his command post in a drainage ditch 10 yards in front of the rear tank destroyer. He had a field telephone connecting him to Praesdam, battalion headquarters. The German attack began at 1400 hours. Murphy saw the counterattack forming through his field glasses. 6 tanks and about 250 foot soldiers in white suits, he recalled later. The distance and snow made them barely visible beyond a mile. Murphy alerted his men. He grabbed the field phone and called the artillery officer at battalion headquarters, arranged for fire support. Then all hell broke loose. German artillery opened up first. Shells screamed overhead and impacted in the forest behind Company B. The barrage was designed to pin down the American infantry and prevent reinforcement. Murphy watched the German tanks split into 2 groups of 3. They fanned out toward either side of the clearing. Behind them came waves of white-clad infantry moving fast across the snow-covered ground. The forward M10 opened fire with its 3-inch main gun. The first round struck a German tank at 700 yards. The shell bounced off the frontal armor. The German tanks returned fire, 88mm guns. The forward M10 was exposed. Within 3 minutes, an 88mm shell struck it. The vehicle was hit. Smoke poured from the crew compartment. The tank destroyer was knocked out. Its crew bailed out and ran for the trees. At 600 yards, Murphy called in artillery corrections. Fire mission. Enemy armor and infantry advancing on our position. The 105mm howitzers from 2nd Battalion responded. 30 seconds later, shells began falling. The first salvo landed too far north. Murphy adjusted. Walk it south 200 yards. The next salvo landed among the German infantry. Bodies flew into the air. The German advance hesitated. But only for seconds. The tanks kept coming. The infantry scattered into shell craters for cover, but continued pushing forward. Murphy fired his M1 carbine at approaching German soldiers. 30 caliber semi-automatic. Effective range maybe 300 yards. The enemy was still beyond that. He emptied his 15-round magazine anyway. The crack of the carbine felt insignificant against the roar of tank engines and artillery. Reloaded. Fired again. His 18 men were spread thin across the clearing. They fired rifles and machine guns. Muzzle flashes sparkled along the tree line. Spent cartridges ejected into the snow. But small arms could not stop tanks. The panzers rolled forward at 400 yards now. Murphy could see the tank commanders standing in their turrets, could see the machine gunners beside them, could hear the diesel engines growing louder. The sound was distinctive. A deep mechanical growl that carried across the frozen field. The tanks churned up snow and frozen earth as they advanced. Their tracks left deep gouges in the ground. 3 tanks moved left, 3 moved right. They were trying to envelop Murphy's position from both flanks. The second M10 behind Murphy's position was still burning, from the earlier hit, but the tank destroyer was still there. Murphy could see flames licking at the engine compartment. Black smoke billowed into the grey sky. The heat was intense even from 10 yards away. Any rational soldier would avoid that vehicle. It was a death trap waiting to explode. But Murphy could see the 50 caliber Browning M2 machine gun mounted on the turret. The gun was intact. The ammunition box beside it appeared undamaged. Murphy knew the Browning 50 caliber. He had trained on it at Camp Walters. 12.7mm. Rate of fire 550 rounds per minute. Effective range against infantry nearly 2,000 yards. Against light vehicles even further. The M10 carried 300 rounds for the 50 caliber. That gun could reach every German soldier in that field. Murphy looked at his 18 men. They were exhausted. They had been fighting for 2 days straight. They had watched 102 of their friends die or fall, wounded. They were down to their last ammunition. The German tanks would be on them in minutes. If Murphy ordered them to hold this position, they would all die. Every single one of them. But if someone could get to that 50 caliber, if someone could use that burning tank destroyer as a firing platform, if someone could deliver sustained fire while directing artillery, maybe, just maybe, the 18 men could withdraw safely to the forest. Maybe they could survive. Murphy made his decision. He turned to Staff Sergeant Elmer Brawley. "Pull the men back into the forest now." Brawley stared at him. "What are you going to do?" Murphy said he would stay at the command post. "Direct artillery. Cover their withdrawal." Brawley started to protest. Murphy cut him off. "That is an order. Move." The 18 men began falling back. They moved in pairs, covering each other, running between shell craters and frozen ground toward the tree line. Murphy stayed in his drainage ditch with the field. Telephone. He called battalion. More fire missions. The artillery kept coming. Shells impacted among the German infantry. Each salvo killed or wounded enemy soldiers. But not enough. The Germans had 250 men. They could absorb casualties and keep advancing. At 300 yards, Murphy made the decision that would earn him the Medal of Honor. He grabbed the field telephone and ran toward the burning tank destroyer 50 yards behind his position. German rifles cracked. Machine gun fire kicked up frozen dirt around his boots. He could hear the bullets snapping through the air. The sound was like someone cracking a whip inches from his ear. Bullets snapped past his head. One round tugged at his jacket sleeve. Another ricocheted off a rock near his feet with a metallic whine. He reached the M10 and grabbed the hot metal hull. The steel was scorching even through his wool gloves. Flames were coming from the engine compartment. The whole rear of the vehicle was engulfed. Orange flames danced and twisted in the wind. Heat waves shimmered above the burning diesel fuel. The heat was so intense it felt like standing in front of an open blast furnace. Thick black smoke poured upward, choking and acrid. The smell of burning diesel, rubber, and paint filled Murphy's nose. Murphy climbed onto the hull. The metal burned his hands through his gloves. He could feel the heat penetrating the leather. His fingers screamed in pain, but he held on. He swung his leg over the open-topped turret and dropped into the crew compartment. The interior was filled with smoke. Visibility was near zero. Heat hit him like a physical blow. The temperature inside the turret had to be over 150 degrees. He could barely breathe. Each breath seared his lungs. The air was toxic with fumes. His eyes immediately began streaming tears. The 50 caliber machine gun was mounted on a pintle at the rear of the turret. Murphy checked the weapon. His hands moved by muscle memory. Training took over. The ammunition belt was loaded and fed into the gun. The belt led to an ammunition box containing 300 rounds. Brass casings gleamed in the flickering firelight. The weapon was ready to fire. Murphy climbed onto the turret roof. Fire roared below him. He could feel the heat through the soles of his boots. The entire vehicle shuddered occasionally as ammunition cooked off in the burning hull. Each small explosion sent a tremor through the metal platform. Any second, the main ammunition store could detonate. If that happened, Murphy would be vaporized instantly. There would be nothing left to bury. He positioned himself behind the 50 caliber. The gun pointed north across the clearing toward the advancing Germans. Murphy pulled back the charging handle. The bolt slammed forward with a metallic clang. He pressed the butterfly trigger. The gun roared to life. The Browning 50 caliber fired with a distinctive hammering sound, deeper than a rifle, louder than a machine gun. Each round was as long as a man's hand. The recoil was substantial even on the vehicle mount. Tracers arced across the frozen field. Murphy watched them walk into a squad of German infantry 200 yards away. Men went down immediately. The 50 caliber rounds were devastating against unarmored targets. Each bullet carried enough energy to tear through multiple soldiers. Murphy traversed the gun left, fired another burst. More Germans fell. He could see them trying to find cover. But the clearing offered little protection. The frozen ground was too hard to dig into. Shell craters from the artillery barrage provided some shelter, but not enough. Murphy kept firing. The barrel began to glow. Spent brass casings ejected from the right side of the gun and clattered onto the turret roof around his feet. The casings were still hot. They burned through his trousers where they landed on his legs. The Germans started concentrating fire on Murphy's position. Rifle, fire. Machine pistol fire. Machine gun fire from the advancing panzers. Bullets cracked past his head. Some rounds hit the tank destroyer with metallic pings. Murphy ignored them. He kept the 50 caliber hammering. A German squad tried to flank right through a drainage ditch. Murphy spotted them at 100 yards. He swung the gun toward them and held down the trigger. 20 rounds. 30 rounds. The entire squad was cut down. Staff Sergeant Elmer Brawley, who witnessed the engagement from the edge of the woods, later testified that the German infantrymen got within 10 yards of Lieutenant Murphy, who killed them in the draws, in the meadows, in the woods, wherever he saw them. The lead German panzer fired its main gun. The 88mm shell hit the M10's hull below Murphy. The whole vehicle shuddered violently. The explosion sent hot metal fragments flying. Murphy felt something punch into his leg, sharp, burning pain. Blood soaked through his wool trousers. Immediately. He looked down briefly. The leg wound was bleeding, but not arterial. He could still stand. He ignored the pain and kept firing. The German infantry reached 150 yards. Murphy could see their faces clearly now. Young men. Some looked terrified, some looked determined. All were advancing despite the casualties piling up around them. They had not expected resistance from a burning tank destroyer. They thought the burning vehicle would be avoided by any rational soldier. Now they were dying because of it. Murphy fired burst after burst. The ammunition belt fed smoothly through the weapon. Every fifth round was a tracer. Murphy watched the tracers arc into enemy formations, watched German soldiers drop, watched others dive for cover. The field was becoming littered with bodies, dead Germans, wounded Germans crawling back toward their lines. The snow was turning red in places. Murphy continued directing artillery fire. He had propped the field telephone on the turret beside him. Between bursts from the .50 caliber, he shouted coordinates into the phone. The artillery battery responded with precision. Shells landed behind the German tanks, behind the advancing infantry. Each salvo killed more enemy soldiers. The combination of artillery and machine gun fire was devastating. For 1 hour, Murphy stood on that burning tank destroyer. The vehicle became his fortress and his potential grave. The Germans tried everything to dislodge him. They tried flanking right through a shallow drainage ditch. Murphy spotted them at 70 yards. He swung the gun toward them. The turret moved smoothly on its bearing despite the damage. He held down the trigger. The .50 caliber roared. 20 rounds. 30 rounds. The entire squad was cut down. Bodies tumbled into the ditch. They tried flanking left through a small copse of trees. Murphy traversed the gun, fired controlled bursts, 3-second bursts. The trees splintered under the heavy machine gun. Fire. Bark exploded. Branches fell. The Germans behind the trees fell with them. They tried direct assault up the middle. 2 platoons. Maybe 60 men. They came in a rush, running across open ground. White camouflage suits against white snow. Murphy fired continuous bursts. The gun overheated. The barrel glowed cherry red, but it kept firing. German soldiers fell in rows. They stumbled over their dead comrades. They slipped in blood and snow. They kept coming anyway. Murphy kept firing. The assault broke 30 yards from his position. The survivors ran back toward Holzwehr. The German tank commanders tried to get clear shots. The panzers maneuvered for firing positions, but the M10 sat in a slight depression. Murphy was partially obscured by the thick smoke pouring from the burning vehicle. The Germans couldn't get a clean shot. The 88mm shells kept hitting the tank destroyer's hull. Each impact shook the vehicle violently, but none hit Murphy directly. German infantry got within 10 yards. Murphy could see the expressions on their faces. Terror, determination, confusion. They couldn't understand why this man wouldn't die. Why he kept firing from a vehicle that should have exploded minutes ago. Murphy aimed the .50 caliber straight down, nearly vertical. He fired point blank. At that range, the heavy machine gun rounds were completely devastating. A single round could tear a man in half. Bodies were thrown backward by the impact. Blood sprayed across the snow. The Germans fell back. They had never encountered resistance like this. Their officers screamed at them to advance. Some tried. Murphy killed them. Others refused. They had seen too many comrades die. They took cover in shell craters and refused to move forward. Murphy's field telephone kept working despite the chaos. Between bursts, he called corrections to the artillery battery. The forward observer was dead. Murphy was directing the fire himself. He could see where the shells landed. He could adjust based on results. Fire for effect, add 50 yards. Fire for effect. The artillery battery commander later said Murphy's fire direction was the most accurate he had ever received from an infantry officer under fire. The ammunition counter showed 250 rounds expended. 50 rounds remaining. Murphy's leg wound was bleeding heavily. Blood filled his boot. He could feel it squishing when he shifted weight. His hands were burned from touching the hot gun barrel. The smoke from the fire made his eyes water constantly. Tears streamed down his face. He could barely see through the smoke and tears. His lungs ached from breathing the toxic fumes, but he kept the gun firing. The German attack was falling apart. Their infantry had taken massive casualties. Bodies covered the snow-covered field. Wounded men crawled or limped back toward Holzwehr. Dead men lay where they fell. The German tank commanders could see their infantry support was gone. Without infantry, tanks in close terrain were vulnerable. The lead tank commander made the decision to withdraw. The panzers began backing up. When the German infantry saw the tanks retreating, they broke. Not an orderly withdrawal, a rout. Men threw down their rifles and ran. Murphy fired his last belt of ammunition into the fleeing Germans. When the bolt locked back on an empty chamber, he released the trigger. Silence fell over the battlefield except for the crackling flames below him and distant moans of wounded Germans. Murphy climbed down from the turret. His wounded leg buckled when he put weight on it. He half climbed, half fell from the M10's hull. He landed hard in the snow. Pain shot through his leg. He looked back at the tank destroyer. The entire vehicle was engulfed in flames now. The ammunition stored inside would cook off soon. Murphy grabbed the field telephone and dragged himself away from the burning vehicle. He had covered maybe 30 yards when the ammunition exploded. The blast was enormous. The turret blew completely off the hull and tumbled through the air. It landed 50 yards away with a heavy crash. Flames shot over 100 feet into the sky. The concussion wave knocked Murphy flat. If he had stayed on that vehicle 10 more seconds, the explosion would have killed him instantly. Murphy limped back toward the tree line. Staff Sergeant Elmer Brawley and the 18 men of Company B emerged from the forest. Brawley saw Murphy's blood-soaked leg and called for a medic. Murphy refused. He said the wound could wait. The Germans were disorganized. This was the time to counterattack. Murphy organized his men. They advanced out of the forest in a skirmish line. The Germans did not resist. They continued fleeing toward Holzwehr. Company B reoccupied their original positions in the clearing. By 1500 hours, the battle was over. Murphy finally allowed the medic to examine his leg. The wound was serious. The medic said Murphy needed evacuation to a field hospital. Murphy refused. He remained with Company B. That night, reinforcements finally arrived. They took over the position. Company B was pulled back for rest and resupply. The casualties from the German attack were documented. Company B had started the day with 18 men. They finished with 18 men, 0 killed, 0 wounded except for Murphy. The German force lost approximately 50 killed or wounded through Murphy's combined actions. This included casualties from both the 50 caliber machine gun fire and the artillery missions Murphy directed. All 6 German tanks withdrew, undamaged but without infantry support. They could not hold the position. American forces captured Holzwehr the next day. The 3rd Battalion, 30th Infantry Regiment took the village on January 27th. The loss of Holzwehr broke the German defensive line. The German 19th Army had been holding the Colmar pocket for 3 months. Murphy's action at the woods outside Holzwehr was one of several that tipped the balance. German resistance in the Colmar pocket collapsed within 2 weeks. French forces retook Colmar on February 2nd. American forces cleared the west bank of the Rhine by February 9th. The last German troops evacuated on February 10th. The 19th Army lost 15,000 men. Most of their heavy equipment was destroyed or abandoned. The Allies now controlled both sides of the Rhine River south of Strasbourg. The path to Germany was open. Lieutenant Colonel Keith Ware began preparing Murphy's Medal of Honor recommendation immediately. He interviewed witnesses. Staff Sergeant Elmer Brawley testified that Murphy refused evacuation 3 times while bleeding from his leg wound. Private Charles Owen testified that Murphy saved the entire company. Private First Class Anthony Abramsky provided sworn testimony stating he saw Lieutenant Murphy climb on top of the burning tank destroyer while bursts of machine, pistol fire from the advancing infantry battered against the hull. The Medal of Honor recommendation moved up through channels. Battalion approved it, Regiment approved it, Division approved it, Corps approved it, Army approved it. The official citation read in part, Second Lieutenant Murphy commanded Company B, which was attacked by 6 tanks and waves of infantry. Second Lieutenant Murphy ordered his men to withdraw to prepared positions in a woods, while he remained forward at his command post and continued to give fire directions to the artillery by telephone. Behind him, to his right, one of our tank destroyers received a direct hit and began to burn. Its crew withdrew to the woods. Second Lieutenant Murphy continued to direct artillery fire which killed large numbers of the advancing enemy infantry. With the enemy tanks abreast of his position, Second Lieutenant Murphy climbed on the burning tank destroyer, which was in danger of blowing up at any moment, and employed its 50 caliber machine gun against the enemy. He was alone and exposed to German fire from 3 sides, but his deadly fire killed dozens of Germans and caused their infantry attack to waver. The enemy made repeated attempts to put him out of action without success. His directing of artillery fire wiped out many of the enemy. Second, Lieutenant Murphy's indomitable courage and his refusal to give an inch of ground saved his company from possible encirclement and destruction and enabled it to hold the woods which had been the enemy's objective. On June 2, 1945, at an airfield near Salzburg, Austria, Lieutenant General Alexander Patch presented the Medal of Honor to now First Lieutenant Audie Murphy. Murphy had been promoted to First Lieutenant on February 16th. By that time, Murphy was the most decorated American combat soldier of World War II. He had earned 33 awards and decorations in total, including every Combat Valor Award the United States Army could give. When reporters asked Murphy why he climbed on that burning tank destroyer, his answer was simple. They were killing my friends. That answer revealed something important about Murphy's motivation. He had lost many friends during the war. The most significant loss was Private Latty Tipton. Tipton was Murphy's best friend. They had fought together through Sicily and Italy. On August 15, 1944, during the invasion of southern France, Tipton was killed by German soldiers who pretended to surrender. When Tipton approached them believing their white flag was genuine, they shot him dead. Murphy went into a rage. He charged the German position alone and killed everyone there. The loss of Tipton affected Murphy deeply for the rest of his life. Murphy had watched his entire original unit die. He joined Company B in 1943 in North Africa. The company had landed in North Africa as part of Operation Torch in November 1942. Murphy arrived as a replacement in February 1943. At that time, Company B numbered 235 men at peak strength. Through the North African campaign, Murphy learned to fight. He learned to kill. He learned to survive. He watched men die from German shells, mines, snipers, disease. The desert was brutal, the heat was suffocating, water was scarce. The Germans were skilled and well-equipped. In July 1943, Company B invaded Sicily. Murphy fought through the mountains. He earned his first decorations for bravery in combat, but more men died, good men, friends. By the time the Sicily campaign ended in August, Company B had lost over half its original strength. In September 1943, Company B landed at Salerno, Italy. The fighting in Italy was savage. The Germans had prepared defensive positions in the mountains. Every ridge was fortified. Every valley was covered by interlocking fields of fire. Company B fought for every yard. They attacked Tume and E2, up mountains under machine gun and mortar fire. They slept in the rain, they ate cold rations, they watched more friends die. Murphy proved himself repeatedly in Italy. He earned battlefield promotions. From private to private, first class to corporal to sergeant, each promotion came because the man above him had been killed or wounded. By January 1944, Murphy was a staff sergeant. He led a squad. Then a platoon. The men trusted him because he kept them alive. In August 1944, Company B participated in Operation Dragoon, the invasion of southern France. That's when Murphy lost Latty Tipton. By October 1944, Murphy was the only survivor from the original Company B that had landed in North Africa. Everyone else was dead, wounded, or transferred. He carried the weight of all those losses. Every death, every name, every face. When Murphy was commissioned as a second lieutenant in October 1944, he had already survived longer than almost anyone in the regiment. Most infantry officers in World War II lasted about 2 weeks in combat before being killed or wounded. Murphy had been in continuous combat for 21 months. He should have been dead 10 times over, but he kept fighting, and he kept his men alive. That burden drove him to take extreme risks at Holtzwihr. He had already lost so many friends that his own survival seemed less important than protecting the men still alive. Murphy's promotion to first lieutenant came on February 16, 1945. He was reassigned from Company B to regimental headquarters as a liaison officer. The army did not want to risk losing its newest hero in combat. Murphy spent the remainder of the war in this role. He participated in the Rhine crossing in March. He was present at the capture of Nuremberg in April. He was in Bavaria when Germany surrendered on May 8. Murphy was discharged from the United States Army on September 21, 1945. He left with the rank of first lieutenant. His disability rating was 50% for combat fatigue, what today would be diagnosed as post-traumatic stress disorder. Actor James Cagney saw Murphy's photograph on the cover of Life magazine in July 1945. Cagney had a policy of helping returning veterans. He contacted Murphy and invited him to Hollywood. Murphy was skeptical but accepted the offer. Murphy moved to Hollywood in October 1945. His film career began slowly with small parts in B-movies. He appeared in Beyond Glory in 1948, then Texas, Brooklyn and Heaven, then Bad Boy in 1949. Directors found him difficult to cast. He looked too young. His voice was too soft. He had no formal acting training. Critics described his early performances as wooden and unconvincing. But Murphy worked hard. He took acting lessons from coach Estelle Harmon. She taught him how to project his voice, how to find the truth in a scene, how to relax in front of the camera. Murphy studied other actors. He watched John Wayne films to learn screen presence. He studied Gary Cooper to learn understated intensity. He practiced his diction by reciting dialogue from William Shakespeare and William Saroyan. Gradually he improved. Murphy appeared in 26 films between 1948 and 1955. Most were westerns, low-budget horse operas produced quickly and cheaply. Sierra, Kansas Raiders, The Cimarron Kid, The Duel at Silver Creek, Column South, Gunsmoke. Murphy played cowboys, sheriffs, outlaws, soldiers. He was popular with audiences but never became a major star. His breakthrough came in 1955 with To Hell and Back. Universal Studios adapted Murphy's autobiography into a major motion picture with a budget of $1.4 million. Murphy played himself. The film depicted his experiences from joining the army through his Medal of Honor action. The film. Holtzwihr scene was the climax. Murphy stood on a mock-up tank destroyer and fired a prop machine gun while explosions went off around him. Director Jesse Hibbs used practical effects. Real fire. Real explosions. The production designer built a replica M10 tank destroyer that could safely burn during filming. Murphy later said filming that scene brought back intense memories. He had nightmares for weeks afterward. He would wake up screaming, back in that burning vehicle with Germans advancing and his friends dying. To Hell and Back was released in October 1955. It became the highest-grossing film in Universal Studios history until Jaws in 1975. The film earned over $6 million domestically. It made Murphy wealthy. He earned residuals for years. The film played in theaters continuously for years. It was re-released multiple times. It eventually appeared on television where new generations discovered Murphy's story. Murphy continued acting through the 1960s. He appeared in 18 more films between 1956 and 1969. The Quiet American with Michael Redgrave, Night Passage with James Stewart, No Name on the Bullet, Cast a Long Shadow, The Unforgiven with Burt Lancaster and Audrey Hepburn, 40 Guns to Apache Pass. Murphy's acting had matured. He was popular with audiences. Critics praised his authenticity. Murphy moved like a real soldier. He handled weapons correctly. His action scenes looked genuine because they were. Murphy knew combat. He knew how men moved under fire. That knowledge showed on screen. But wealth did not bring peace. Murphy struggled with severe post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms throughout his adult life. He experienced nightmares every night. He would wake up screaming. He slept with a loaded Colt .45 pistol under his pillow every night for the rest of his life. He developed chronic insomnia and became addicted to prescription sleeping pills. In 1966, Murphy decided to quit the sleeping pills. He checked himself into a motel room for 1 week and went through withdrawal without medical supervision. It was brutal. He suffered seizures, hallucinations, and severe physical pain. When he emerged after 7 days, he was clean. He never took sleeping pills again. Murphy spoke publicly about this experience. He became one of the first prominent veterans to openly discuss post-traumatic stress disorder. This was revolutionary. In the 1960s, mental health issues among veterans were considered shameful. Men were expected to come home from war and simply move on with their lives. If they couldn't, they were considered weak, cowards, failures. Murphy refused to accept this. He was the most decorated American soldier of World War II. Nobody could question his courage. He used that credibility to speak truth about the psychological wounds of war. He gave interviews to magazines. He appeared on television talk shows. He discussed his nightmares openly. He talked about waking up with his hands around his wife's throat, thinking she was a German soldier. He described sleeping with a loaded pistol for 25 years. Murphy testified before Congress multiple times between 1966 and 1970. He appeared before the House Committee on Veterans Affairs. He met with senators. He submitted written testimony. His message was consistent. Combat veterans need specialized mental health care. They need treatment without stigma. They need research into what we now call post-traumatic stress disorder. Murphy met with Veterans Administration officials. He toured VA hospitals. He talked with doctors and psychiatrists. He pushed for funding for research. He demanded that the VA establish programs specifically for combat trauma. Most importantly, he put a face on the issue. When Americans thought about PTSD, they thought about Audie Murphy, the hero, the Medal of Honor recipient, the man who saved 18 soldiers by climbing onto a burning tank. If Audie Murphy needed help, then needing help wasn't weakness. Murphy's advocacy contributed directly to the eventual establishment of comprehensive PTSD treatment programs in the Veterans Administration hospital system. The diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder wasn't officially recognized until 1980, 9 years after Murphy's death. But the groundwork he laid made that recognition possible. The Audie L. Murphy Memorial VA Hospital in San Antonio, Texas, was dedicated in 1973 specifically because of his advocacy work. The hospital specializes in treating combat veterans with PTSD. Thousands of veterans have received treatment there. Many credit Murphy's advocacy with saving their lives. Murphy married twice. His first marriage to actress Wanda Hendricks in 1949 ended in divorce in 1951. He married Pamela Opal Lee Archer in April 1951. They had 2 sons. Terry Michael Murphy was born in 1952. James Shannon Murphy was born in 1954. The marriage lasted until Murphy's death 20 years later. By 1970, Murphy was struggling financially. He had invested poorly in business ventures. He owed back taxes to the Internal Revenue Service. He was working constantly to pay his debts. On May 28, 1971, Murphy was flying from Atlanta, Georgia to Martinsville, Virginia for a business meeting. He was a passenger in a private Aero Commander 680 aircraft. The pilot was Herman Butler, who held a private pilot certificate. Butler was not instrument rated. This was a critical factor. Flying without instrument rating means a pilot is only qualified to fly in clear weather when they can see the ground. Butler was not legally qualified to fly in the weather conditions he encountered. He had over 8,000 hours total flight time. This seemed like extensive experience, but he had only 6 hours in this specific aircraft type. The Aero Commander 680 handled differently than other aircraft Butler had flown. He wasn't fully familiar with its systems or flight characteristics. Also aboard were the plane's owner, 2 other businessmen, and 1 additional passenger. 6 people total. The flight departed Atlanta in marginal weather conditions. Weather reports indicated deteriorating visibility along the planned route. The pilot encountered severe weather over the Blue Ridge Mountains near Roanoke, Virginia. Heavy fog reduced visibility to near zero. Mountain flying requires clear visibility. Pilots must be able to see terrain to avoid obstacles. Butler was attempting to navigate by instruments but was not qualified to do so. He had never been trained in instrument flying. He didn't have the skills to maintain aircraft control without visual reference to the horizon. The National Transportation Safety Board investigated the crash. The NTSB determined that Butler had continued flying into deteriorating weather conditions. He flew too low. He was trying to stay below the clouds so he could see the ground. This is called scud running. It's one of the most dangerous things a pilot can do. Flying low in poor visibility in mountainous terrain gives zero margin for error. At approximately 1100 hours local time, the plane crashed into Brush Mountain at an elevation of approximately 3,400 feet. The aircraft hit trees at high speed. The impact was catastrophic. The aircraft disintegrated. All 6 people aboard were killed instantly. Murphy was 45 years old. He had survived 27 months of frontline combat in World War II. He had earned every valor award the United States Army could give. He had stood on a burning tank destroyer and refused to die. And now he was gone in a random plane crash caused by pilot error. Murphy's body was not recovered for 3 days. Search crews had difficulty finding the crash site in the dense forest and rugged terrain. Fog continued to hamper search efforts. When they finally located the wreckage on May 31st, they identified Murphy's body through his military identification tags and dental records. Murphy's funeral services were held on June 4th and June 7th, 1971. Murphy was buried at Arlington National Cemetery on June 7th with full military honors. The funeral procession was elaborate. An honor guard from the 3rd Infantry Division participated. A caisson drawn by horses carried his flag-draped casket. A riderless horse with boots reversed in the stirrups followed in the military tradition honoring fallen warriors. Murphy's grave is in Section 46, Site 366-11. The headstone is simple regulation white marble. It lists his name, rank, dates of birth and death, and the Medal of Honor. The grave has become one of the most visited sites at Arlington National Cemetery. Only President John Kennedy's grave receives more visitors. Over 100,000 people visit Murphy's grave annually. In January 2000, the village of Holtzwihr, France, erected a permanent memorial at the site where Murphy made his stand. The memorial dedication took place on January 29th, 55 years after the battle. The memorial is a stone monument approximately 8 feet tall, with a bronze plaque mounted on the front. The plaque depicts Murphy in relief sculpture, standing and firing the .50 caliber machine gun from the tank destroyer turret. The background shows the forest and advancing German forces. The inscription is in both French and English. It reads, "This memorial is dedicated to the soldiers of the 3rd United States Infantry Division who liberated Holtzwihr on the 27th January 1945 after bloody combat under most trying conditions. It represents the heroic act that Lieutenant Audie L. Murphy of the 15th infantry regiment achieved at this site on 26 January 1945 in order to push back an enemy counterattack. For this action, he was decorated with the highest American and French honors. The memorial stands in an open field north of Holtzwihr village, where the German tanks advanced 75 years earlier. The location was determined through study of period maps, after-action reports, and survivor testimony. Visitors can stand at the memorial and look south across the clearing toward Holtzwihr. The view Murphy had is largely unchanged. The village is still visible. The road he defended still runs through the area. The Bois de Riedwehr forest, where his 18 men took cover, still stands along the eastern edge of the field. In winter, snow covers the ground just as it did in 1945. Murphy's legacy extends beyond the medals and decorations he earned. He fundamentally changed how the American military thinks about individual initiative and courage under fire. Before Holtzwihr, military doctrine heavily emphasized unit cohesion and collective action. After Holtzwihr, doctrine began acknowledging that sometimes one soldier in the right position at the right moment with the right skills can change the outcome of an entire battle. Modern special operations forces trace part of their doctrinal lineage to examples like Murphy's action. Murphy also fundamentally changed how America treats combat veterans with psychological trauma. His public advocacy for mental health treatment helped destigmatize post-traumatic stress disorder at a time when seeking such help was seen as weakness. His advocacy contributed directly to the eventual establishment of comprehensive PTSD treatment programs in the Veterans Administration hospital system. The Audie L. Murphy Memorial VA Hospital in San Antonio, Texas, was dedicated in 1973 specifically because of his advocacy work. The United States Military Academy at West Point includes Murphy's Holtzwihr action in its curriculum on combat leadership. Officer candidates analyze Murphy's decision-making process. The case study examines when it is appropriate for a commander to sacrifice himself for his unit. When Murphy climbed onto that burning M10 tank destroyer on January 26, 1945, he made a choice that defined not just his own life, but what it means to be a soldier. He had lost too many friends to stand by and watch 18 more men die, so he climbed on that tank destroyer. He fought for an hour on an exploding vehicle. He directed artillery fire while machine gun bullets cracked past his head. He stayed until the battle was won, and he saved them all. If you found this story as powerful as we did, please take a moment to like this video. It helps us share more forgotten stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Each story honors those who served. Each story preserves the memory of sacrifice that should never be forgotten. We would love to hear from you. Leave a comment below, telling us where you are watching from. Our community spans the globe, from veterans who serve to young people learning history for the first time. Thank you for watching, and thank you for ensuring that stories like this are never forgotten.